All right, so we're going to go ahead and record, and I wanted to thank y'all for coming to the next installment of the Social Justice Leadership Series. For those of you who don't know who I am, I serve as the Director of the Office of Student Orientation, Leadership, and Engagement. I'm Dr. Hudson, and this is one of the events that we have each month celebrating a culture. And this year, our focus as it relates to social justice leadership programs are the experiences of culture specifically here at TAMIU, and looking at how the different cultures and our celebration of those cultures are impacted here at our institution. So today we have a wonderful individual who's going to talk about their experience at TAMIU, but I think it's important for us to even arrive at common knowledge to start things off as it relates to what is it that we're even here to talk about. February is Black History Month, and part of the when we look at TAMIU, our institution is very homogenous, meaning a majority of our students identify, over 90+% of students identify as Hispanic Latino. But within that identity, we have some individuals who, even if they do identify as Hispanic Latino, they also have another intersecting identity as it relates to race. And so we're going to go ahead and take a look at a couple of short videos prior to bringing on our panelists as we move through this, to help us arrive at the same. I do not like that speaker. Let's take a look here.
I remember when I first discovered what black was, and then people kept calling people black. I remember like black, oh, he's black, oh, she's black. I'm like, black? They're not black, they're brown. They're dark brown. That don't make no sense.
Being proud of my African roots is something that I don't take lightly, and I embrace because it's part of who I am.
Nosotros queremos un mundo que decimos que tenemos un latino unidos, pero con el mismo tiempo tenemos que terminar la discriminación entre nosotros los latinos.
Estamos como estamos porque somos racistas entre nosotros mismos, entre nuestra propia gente. ¿Sabes qué? No nos apoyamos.
I always feel like I'm never Latina enough because of my skin color, because of my hair.
I would just hear my family be like, oh, don't go out with somebody that's dark skinned. No salgas con un negro. Arregla la raza.
Dark skin in the Latino community isn't considered beautiful.
We've been colonized so poorly that we want to identify with being white so much, not all of us, but many of us, that we look down on dark skin.
Tú como negro latino tienes dos problemas. Primero, eres negro, te discriminan por negro. Segundo, eres latino, te discriminan por latino. Eso es doble minoría.
I remember when I was a kid, I looked at myself in the mirror. Yo dije, esta nariz, estos labios que tengo yo, amor. ¿Sabes que yo era? Porque yo pensaba que yo era feo.
Tuve una compañera de trabajo que me enteré que a mi espalda se expresaba de mí como mona, la mona. ¿Sabes qué es lo más triste? Que ella era una latina.
I know I always stress to my family whenever they say something like, they'll be like, Julissa, tú y eso moreno. And I'm like, we are the morenos. That's us.
Your parents are instilling in you that these European features are the most beautiful thing. The standard of beauty for them is blonde hair and blue eyes.
I think there's some colorism just across the board because we've been taught that lighter skin is beautiful. Since light skin and fair skin is being portrayed on all platforms like TV and media and all of these things, it lets me know that that's what they perceive as beautiful. And then you look on TV and the telenovelas, they don't look like me, ever. The only one I can remember is Celia.
Algo que me pasa muy seguido es que las personas dicen, ay, qué bonita eres para ser una negrita. Entonces, una persona negra no puede ser bonita.
Dark skin is beautiful, and it has melanin in it, and it doesn't age we hate ourselves so much that we really don't understand how beautiful we are.
Que no por mi color o por lo que tú crees, tú no me vas a parar. Que yo voy a triunfar. Lo que yo voy a hacer, yo voy a triunfar.
Embrace the beauty that is you, because most people are trying to look like you. They're going to get their hair curled, they're going to get tans, they're getting injections in their butts and in their lips. They want to look like you. So don't hate you, because everybody wants to look like you.
Si había una fórmula, yo creo que ya lo habíamos arreglado, no hay ninguna fórmula. Como individuo, tiene que enseñar a tu gente de ser orgulloso de ser lo que eres. Somos negros y debemos ser orgullosos.
It's okay to be brown and dark, and it's okay to have beautiful big lips and features like this. It is okay. It is more than okay, actually, because the world changes and moves in different rhythms. And right now, people want to look like us.
That's what I was saying. So okay.
So I think,
Corte.
especially as we begin to,
I remember when I
come on, especially as we begin to look at from an institutional perspective, we often forget kind of a hidden identity that we do have present amongst our students here. We as an institution often celebrate, and rightfully so, our place as a Hispanic serving institution, but we often forget what is known as a hidden identity for those that do come from different racial backgrounds. And it's because we as a society down here in Laredo and even in Texas often can't differentiate between what is Hispanic or Latino or Spanish, right? We use those words interchangeably oftentimes, and we forget that in fact, a majority of Latinos in the world are Black, right? The largest Latino country in the Western Hemisphere is Brazil, right? So we often forget about it because we are here in a place that's very homogenous. And so I want to watch briefly, what is the difference between Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish to get our mindset as we move in here to our conversation with our panelists today.
Do you know what the difference between Latina or Hispanic and Spanish is? Between Latina, Hispanic, and Spanish.
I would have to say where they live.
Okay, so like
Geographic.
they're just different ethnies. I mean, between Mexican, Latin America, to European. That was confusing. The general public and the media use both of these terms interchangeably, but there is a slight difference. Hispanic is a term that refers to Spanish-speaking origin or ancestry. Latino is a more frequently used term which refers to origin or ancestry to Latin America. Does Latina mean someone who speaks Spanish, because in the case of Brazilians who speak Portuguese? Hispanic is basically based on whether you or your family speak the language of Spanish, whereas Latino is focusing more on geographic location, that being Latin America. So unlike Hispanic, Latino includes Brazilians, but excludes Spaniards.
I hate when people call me Spanish because I'm not.
Okay.
You're Spanish if you're from Spain.
Spanish is from Spain, like store, kind of thing. I know a lot of people when they enter somewhere, they get someone Spanish, like, oh, they're Spanish. And I'm like, no, they both Spanish. That does not mean that they're from Spain. For starters, Spanish describes someone who comes from Spain. It's a term of nationality, but it's also a language. Think of Italian. It's a language, but it's also a nationality. Which one is Latina? ¿Por qué no es Latina?
Por el semblante de la cara.
Semblante que tiene más She looks Black. Can you be Black and be Latina? I believe so, but some people, like instead of like, no, we're different. Those are the ones that have been colonized. I'm not even gonna disagree with you there.
I think they all could be Latina. I feel like they could all be Hispanic.
mean, they all could be Spanish too. You don't know.
Really tell just by a person's face whether they're Latino, Hispanic, or Spanish. Because many Latin American countries, like those of my parents, Colombia and Peru, were colonized by Spain, many folks don't feel the need or want to identify with a term that indicates them belonging to Spain. Maybe think of it this way: Hispanic, a sense of community through a connection to Spain. Latino, a sense of community through a history of colonization from Spain. Colonization isn't something that we just read about in our textbook. We feel the effects of centuries of colonization today through lost history, erasure of native and African languages, faith practices, basically our culture. So it's no wonder why so many folks just don't want to identify with the term Hispanic. That doesn't mean that Latino doesn't have any remnants of Spanish colonialism. I mean, Latino and Latina is supposed to describe folks from Latin America, but the term Latin America only came to be after European Spanish imperialism. It's important to remember that none of these forms of identity are perfect. And that's because they're socially constructed and mostly only used in the US. They also lead people to assume that Latino or Hispanic is a race, when that's not true, which is why so many Latinos with African ancestry have begun to use the term Afro-Latina. As for me, well, until a term that comes around that fully encompasses and embraces both the indigenous and African influences of Latin America, I'm going to stick to identifying as an indigenous Latina. How do you identify? How do you feel about the terms Latina, Hispanic, and Spanish? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm gonna ask you. Okay.
All right, so what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna stop at this share and I'm gonna move over our guest today. I don't know if they'll be there, but before we begin, I do think that it's important for folks to understand this is a fairly recent phenomena where we are actually researching and showcasing the Afro-Latino experience in the United States. Starting in the 2010 census in the United States, we began to really hone in on the identity. Over 6 million Americans identify as Afro-Latino. And that's basically 2% of the United States population, but it's often lumped in together. And I think that's what we're here today. So today we have Jaden Gray, who is a alumna of TAMIU. And so she's gonna talk about her experience. I have some questions, but really this is more the way I had envisioned this was we're gonna allow Jaden, I have some questions here for her, but it's really your questions that you have as it relates to engaging with the panelists around their experience. It shouldn't just be me facilitating this conversation. And so we're going to turn it over to Jaden. Hi, Jaden.
Hello, everybody. I love to see the turnout.
Fantastic. So
we're gonna, you already introduced me.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions. Why don't we just do basic introduction? So what was your major when you were here? What's your hometown and how do you identify?
Okay, so I am from Chicago and I'm currently in Chicago right now. I studied biology with a minor in music performance. And what was the last question you said?
You identify.
Okay, well, I am mixed with Black American and Mexican, so I would it depends. It's a little difficult. Yeah, Black Mexican mixed. I used to primarily call myself Afro-Latina until I realized the term was more towards Black Latinos. So I had some difficulty coming to terms with what I would identify myself as. So
yeah, so I think
it depends.
Yeah, Jaden, I actually think that's such a unique thing that you just said, right? Like even you yourself having challenges understanding how to identify because it's more for those that are Black, Latino, but you would quantify based off of the definitions that we've heard today as Afro-Latina. So, we can go a little bit more into that as we move through, but I think that's such an interesting piece just off the bat. as we're talking about this. What was your involvement here at TAMIU, and then what are you currently doing?
Okay, I was in Sigma Lambda Gamma. I was also in the TAMIU Mariachi, also for some time the orchestra. I was also in Women in STEM. And currently I am a lab assistant in a hospital. I work in a microbiology lab.
It's awesome.
I'm actually here right now. I'm in the conference room.
That's so awesome. And I love to see students that have graduated go and utilize their degree in the actual field that they got their degree in, right? Like, because that's why you're supposed to go to college, right? Like, so I'm loving it. You also were an orientation leader, just heavily involved in multiple layers, right? You were from Chicago. How did you even figure out about TAMIU, right? Like, how did you even come down here?
Well, my best friend that some of you in the audience may know, Angie or Angela Carranza, she came here before I did because of the mariachi program that they had. And while I was looking for colleges, because I'm a year younger than she is, she recommended, just taking a look into TAMIU, and I did. And I came down for Dusty Camp, and the first thing I fell in love with was the campus. It felt like Narnia, but like mini, and I loved it. I loved it so much. So yeah, I grew to love TAMIU, honestly.
Yeah, so did you have a chance to visit TAMIU prior to you coming to Dusty Camp and being admitted here?
Nope. I actually had only been to Texas once many years ago, so it was my first like memory I have in Texas.
That's great. And so I guess really what I'm here to do is let's talk about your experience. So if you wouldn't mind describing your experience, so we talked about Dusty Camp, you fell in love with the institution and the campus, but let's talk about what were that first semester, maybe first year, what was it like for you? One, being from Chicago, right? Like, it was super hella warm down here comparatively to Wisconsin or to Illinois. But let's talk about it also, just of kind of the culture that you came into.
Yeah, for sure. So you had mentioned the weather change. Big change. As soon as I stepped foot off the plane into Texas, I was already sweating. So I was like, okay, it's something I have to get used to. But as far as the culture in TAMIU, and Laredo too, just because I see the cultures are very different than being on campus than it is in the city. A little bit of a culture shock, only because Chicago is so diverse. You can go, maybe 10 minutes driving west and you're in a part of the city where there's a bunch of Polish people, and you go 15 minutes north and there's a bunch of Hispanic people, and here you kind of have a mini around the world. But when I got to TAMIU first, I just arrived there first. As you mentioned, it was literally 90% Mexican or Latinos there. And even though it wasn't something I had seen, I wasn't completely out of place, only because I am Mexican myself and I have been with family and stuff like that. But it was kind of interesting to see how little diversity there was, but still I felt welcome in a way. But then if I go outside of TAMIU and, in the Laredo community, in the Laredo city, it's a little more different, because people are a little more closed-minded, especially those that are a little older in age. They haven't really come around to, I don't know, accepting different terms or different types of people. So every time I would go outside of TAMIU, it was a new experience. Never really know what to expect, but yeah, that's the little summary of my time there.
Yeah, so you talked about feeling a little bit more comfortable here on campus than in the Laredo. Can you talk a little bit more about why you felt more comfortable here than maybe off campus? Maybe just a little bit, are there specific instances that happened off campus that led you to believe that Laredo wasn't as welcoming than TAMIU, or was that just the general feeling that you had, or were there specific instances that you could point to? that led you to believe that?
Well, I guess if I were to give like a more like contrasting situations, being in TAMIU and on campus with the other students, they were more willing to, I guess, learn some new things or willing to accept different things. So if I would tell, maybe my freshman year, I would ask my friends, hey, like, don't say the N-word, like, it makes me a little uncomfortable. You're not Black. Can you, like, please respect that? And they would respect that, or at least try. But if I were maybe out in like Laredo in the city, and sometimes I have like really big hair, and you can tell that I'm not fully Mexican, like I'm a Black Mexican, like I'm mixed, like I'm mixed with something, I would kind of get not targeted, but people would always like ask me like, oh, what are you? Or oh, like you're a little pretty little Black girl, and like stuff like that, like microaggressions, or I don't know, like I don't know if that makes I don't know if that makes sense. They're just like a little more closed-minded.
Yeah, so I think those are perfect examples, Jaden, of when you're off campus experiencing those microaggressions, right? And microaggressions are the everyday slights and snubs that kind of denigrate you or your lived experience, intentionally or unintentionally, right? Like some people may have had the best of intention by saying, oh, we'll give it like using your examples, like, oh, you're very pretty for a yada, 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 or where are you really from, right? Not accepting that you are Latina or Hispanic, right? And I think that's those experiences. Did you have any of those microaggressions maybe here on campus as well?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I'm not saying that it was perfect and then everyone like was, knew how to act around me, but there were times that I would tell people like, oh, I'm from Chicago, but I'm Mexican and I'm mixed with Black, and they'll be like, then how do you know Spanish? How are you Mexican? Or like, how do you know about this certain dish? Or I would tell people like about my experiences, and I'd be like, oh, like, I visit my family in Mexico and we do this and this, and they're like, oh no, like you don't understand, like that doesn't make any sense. Like you're not Mexican enough for that to be possible. I'd be like, how are you gonna diminish my experiences? I experienced them. Like I'm not lying. So
Yeah.
It would happen sometimes, not as often, but sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, that's such a interesting experience, and thank you so very much for sharing your experience here on campus. I think sometimes we often like to claim something as our own and don't necessarily want to be always as inclusive or including of others as we could. And I think sometimes there's this othering that takes place, right? And I think that's what I'm hearing, at least when I look or when I listen to you. I'm hearing this othering that inadvertently takes place within there. Let's talk about your Black or African American identity. Right. So we know here at TAMIU, we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. We celebrate very much our identity as Hispanic, Mexican, Latinos, etc. We celebrate that. Did you feel that your Afro identity or that Black identity that you have was celebrated here at the institution?
I think the effort was really there. Like it was nice to see that there was effort put into, activities or education around, Black culture and the Black community and whatnot. But I definitely think there can be more that can be done, just because I do know that there are Black students on campus, and they also deserve to feel welcome by having everyone included into this educational journey. So yeah, I see.
What would be a recommendation to include them more? Yeah, so right, like
okay. See, that was the thing that I struggled with, because my freshman year, when I first saw, like, for example, Black History Month and the events and whatnot, I would compare it to like my friends that went to school in, like, say here in Chicago, and they had certain events, and I would reach out to them and say, hey, like, how did you come up with these ideas, or how did you plan to do this? And I mean, it's a little simpler when said Black students are doing these events, they're organizing these events versus like a group of like a bunch of like white kids that are making an event for Black students, But I would say, I don't know, just it's a little hard to come up with ideas like that.
And I think that's the point, right? And I think that's what I'm trying to get at is there's not an easy solution, right? There's not. And I think part of it, I look around this room, TAMIU has a student population of about 8,000 students and 6,500 of them are undergraduates. And in that undergraduate population, we have about 5% that identify as Black. Black African-American. Yet I look across this room of about 40 people. There's not what we have here, not any faculty, staff, folk that are here to hear the comments that are offered in this space, right? Other than SOL staff. So I look here as, right, we can get in front of students and they can create spaces, but maybe what we are lacking is faculty and administration hearing from a student perspective of the need to foster that. Does that make sense of kind of what I'm getting here? I look across here, it's all students for the most part. And maybe there's administration that's there. When I look at your friends that may have gone to universities in Chicago, they may have faculty and staff that are Black, where they can go to kind of navigate through. Did that, when you were here at TAMIU, did you feel as if you were represented in the faculty staff area? Did you have a capacity of finding mentors that could address your specific needs that may be a little bit different than other students? Or were your needs different than other students?
I think just because I have like both identities, I can definitely say it wasn't too difficult to find help if I needed it, just because like I don't know if you have heard this, but like it's a little difficult for Black Americans to say that we have like like we can visually see like our culture, like we're, as with Mexicans, there's like the music, there's like folklorico dancing, there's stuff like that. But with Black Americans, because of the erasure of our history, because of slavery and whatnot, it's a little difficult to tie it back to that. So it's a little easier for me to tap into like my Mexican culture per se. So I didn't really struggle with finding help if I needed it in that sense.
Great. So those are some of the pre-planned questions that I have. I'm going to throw it now to the audience and let them ask their questions. Friends, this isn't just me. We're trying to make these more interactive. Yeah. No, someone had a hand up in the back, I thought. Nobody? We don't have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear
Hey, Jaden.
We'll repeat it. You can come up here if you want to, so you can come up to the mic and hopefully she'll hear you.
Is it the mic?
See.
All right, Jadens. Did you ever feel like SLG helped you out because of your background? How they derived from the MPHC?
I guess help in what way?
Like, did you feel a sense of they derive from the D9? So how it's Black, they have the Black background. Did you feel like that assisted in your decision to join them?
Good question. I don't think it was really that it helped with my decision, but it really helped me stay into the sorority. It helped me, cross the finish line and get there. Because I knew pretty much nothing about SLG when I first asking around about it and finding myself like signing up to go to the events and whatnot. But once I started going through the educational part and learning more about the background of the sorority, I felt, I guess the tie that I felt with the sorority strengthened, because then it was like, it's a Latina founded multicultural sorority, which is like, oh, that's kind of perfect for me, because we do have ties to, D9. But also there's like this multicultural, also a lot of Latinos in the sorority that makes me feel a little more at home. So I would say, yeah, in a sense, SOG did kind of help. Obviously, there's a very long way to go for not only our chapter, but like other chapters around, the United States. There's a long way to go for them to accepting people of different cultures. But yeah, SOG did help me in a way.
Yeah, and so I appreciate you sharing that, Jaden. Are there any other questions? And thank you for asking. Because I mean, I think it's important for us to, to be able to hear from someone who had a very unique experience, that they're not the only ones here, right? We know that there are other Afro-Latino students on this campus, whether they're visible or not visible. And so I guess one of the questions is, for students that are in both of that have identify as both Black and Latino, or Afro-Latino, they've often thought that I don't belong in either group. And we saw that in the first video, right? I don't belong in either group. Was that something that, talk to me through, like, maybe not your TAMIU experience, but like, is that something that you've had to confront often? And how do you navigate through that?
Yeah, for sure. Just because, I mean, like at first glance, when you look at me, people either think, oh, she's from some Latin country, or oh, she's like Puerto Rican, or people like to make assumptions about me. So right off the bat, you can't really tell that I'm mixed, or like that I'm mixed with something. So, you hear I'm too Mexican for one side, but I'm too American for the other side. And I definitely feel that, only because if I do go with like my Mexican family, or I go to Mexico to visit my family, I do get like outed every once in a while for being La Morenita, and little tiny microaggressions, which I get, because there is anti-Blackness within the Mexican community, unfortunately. We're getting there, but it's there, it's present still. But then, on the other side, if I'm with my dad's side of the family, my dad is Black, there's also the same thing, like they like make fun, like they poke fun at me for being Mexican. Like I understand, like it's not to be mean, it's all fun and games, but still, like either way I go, like I'm gonna be outed a little bit. And that even goes further than my family, goes with my friends too. Pretty much similar experiences. Like I would have trouble making friends who are Black or Afro-Latino, because I don't look like them. So other way too. I don't know. I don't know if that made sense.
It does. Yeah, it does. And I appreciate you sharing that. I think that that's important for us to know. Like, it's hard for students that may have both identities present inside of them to be able to really truly find their place of belonging at an institution, right? It's important. Connie, question?
So can you hear me, Jaden? A little bit?
Yeah, I can hear you a little bit.
Awesome. So I think it's amazing. The way I'm looking at it is that I find my Mexican so beautiful and so colorful and rich. And then what I'm thinking is, you share two cultures, right? So you're able to have two beautiful, rich cultures that you are able to bask in as an individual. And so my question to you is, what do you find to be beautiful? What do you find to be those positive aspects of being able to share two cultures? And if you can like point out what those are from both.
For sure. Oh, that's a good question. Thank you, Connie. I how do I word this? It's definitely best of both worlds. I get a look into, either cultures, and I'm really appreciative that I get to, celebrate both of them. And I try to do it equally because, it's who I am. It's not one or the other. And I guess like an example of that is, let's see. So I guess for like my Mexican culture, the way I celebrate it and was playing mariachi. That's part of, the Mexican culture. That's something I participated in. And, on the other side, with the back in like the Black culture, I found it more being educational and educating other people. I know it doesn't seem like much, but because of the way I look, I don't look Black. I do have, what's the word? I have, what's the word, Dr. Hudson?
I don't know.
Did someone say something?
No. Is it like fluidity to move between?
Not fluidity, but I don't get put down as other who are like darker than I am.
Yeah, privilege.
Privilege, there we go. I don't totally linked out. But I have that privilege that I'm not gonna get singled out because I'm of a darker skin color. So I find it very important to learn as much as I can and educate people who might look like me or look like you all in the audience because it's important to learn about this stuff, but yeah.
On that same note, around privilege, right? So we talk about that. There's another concept called covering, where you have the ability to kind of hide your identity in different spaces, right? To be able to fit in more, right? And so, we know that within the Mexican community or Latino community, there's a wide variety of phenotype or skin tone. Some of them, like myself, light skin, others darker skin colors. And so, and they don't necessarily face, as you were just saying, the same levels of racism that perhaps other darker skin, for example, I look specifically at Dominicans or Cubans or Panamanians, as we saw at the onset of the video, or even Brazilians may face. And so I guess part of what I'm getting at here is, did you find yourself moving between the different communities at an easier rate?
I would say I found it easier to move more to like the Mexican community because of the color of my skin, other than the other way around. But if someone's like Black descent, they could tell because of some of the features that I have. So I can say like, oh, I'm Mexican. They'll be like, no, you're not. Like, you're mixed with something. So it depends on the type of people I'm interacting with.
Okay. What other questions do you all have? Yes, Nana.
Jaden, it's me, Nana. Okay, so I have a question, and the question is, how, as we, like majority of like Latinos or Hispanic people, can better support Afro-Latinx students, like for the future or just even now, like how can we better support and help y'all that have like the two different identities?
Good question. I would say being more aware. I would say when I was in TAMIU is definitely a place where you're kind of closed off. Kind of as soon as I got there, when it came to like news or events that were happening outside of campus, it was just, I didn't really hear about it because that information wasn't coming to me directly. So I would say just trying to be more aware, read the news, keep your friends accountable, keep your friends accountable, keep your friends accountable. If they're saying something a little anti-Black, call it out. Like, hey, that's a little racist. Let's not say that. Or, including others into your space as well. So if someone is a little, maybe they seem like out of place, try to invite them to those places, because maybe they do feel out of place because they don't look like you all, or they don't feel what you feel because of the cultural differences and whatnot. So I'd say that's some of my advice.
Thank you. That was a great question, Anna, and thank you, Jaden, for sharing. Often, Jaden, I hear from other Afro-Latino students that they feel that you had said one of the the more beautiful parts is sharing and educating around your culture. But on the flip side, a lot of students that are Afro-Latino tend to believe that that's really exhaustive, that they're constantly educating, right? It's that kind of invisible burden that's there. And so they also say that it shouldn't necessarily be up to just the students that are Afro-Latino or Black, educating others around Black culture and anti-racism or anti-Blackness, things of that nature. Did you ever experience that feeling of like just being a little bit overwhelmed and not really necessarily knowing where to start, or feeling like a lot was on your shoulders, right? Like you bore that burden?
Every once in a while, yes. Like some people would, ask me certain things about, say, like there was an event that happened or a tragedy, and it was because of like a racist tragedy. Like something happened, people might come to me and be like, what do you think about this? Or, oh, like, what is your opinion? What do you think people should be doing? Or stuff like that. And I'd be like, well, first of all, I am not a part of this event that happened. Like, I'm very sorry. I can't answer your question. Or why am I the only one? Like, there's so many resources out in the world, books online, Facebook sometimes, Twitter, that you can find information like this, and it doesn't have to always fall on students like me or of, darker skin colors, like we're not encyclopedias. So
yeah, and I can think like you were here during George Floyd's murder, right? And you can think about kind of that trauma that you were experiencing, perhaps you or others in your same boat were experiencing around police brutality, and having to constantly maybe speak for or be looked to for answers. I could probably think, because I think you were an orientation leader at that time. I was saying, I'm trying to think back. Like that could be an example of a time that may be the case. Are there other examples, or?
I would say more, examples kind of similar to that. Just people would it would come up in conversation and they would be like, oh, well, do you have a solution, or what do you suggest? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like 18, 19, 20 years old. I don't have all the answers. So yeah, mostly situations like that.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're getting at, is educating yourself around these topics. And so I'm appreciative of the folks here today that are here learning a little bit about it. And I don't look for solutions necessarily, but I do think that when we talk about our history, there's tend to have been this erasure even in this area, right? And I wonder just aloud of what are ways that we can ensure that students, Afro-Latino students, and their experiences aren't erased from at least the lived experience of TAMIU students. I'm not looking at the broader societal. I'm looking at how do we, as an administrator myself, how do we ensure that we're inclusive of Afro-Latino voices here at this campus, as it is a larger population.
Mm.
And there may not be an answer that you have, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
really,
it's,
I wonder though, like, I guess that gives me pause, I guess as kind of maybe more of a rhetorical question of how do we ensure that we don't just go to them, one, but two, how do we ensure that we are including them in what we're doing across the board? And how are we interacting with the different spaces, right? Where they may feel more affinity or identity with their Black or Afro identity versus maybe their Hispanic or Latino identity, right? So maybe on the flip side from where you were, right? You said you identify a little bit more with the Mexican identity, feel a little, but there may be others that identify more with their Black identity or Afro identity. Finding ways, I guess that's more of a rhetorical question, but yeah, it is still challenging even to this day. Yes, Connie.
So, TAMIU is primarily made up of Hispanic, Latino here. We are Hispanic Serving Institute, but we are not just an HSI, but like 90+% of our population is Latino. How did that play a role in you coming here with your background, rather than perhaps you joining a different university, perhaps in Chicago or anywhere else, where it wasn't that population, where it was a higher percentage of African-American students, white students of different cultures and backgrounds? How do you think that played a part in your career right now and in your experiences? Like focusing in on your career right now, that you're saying that you are in, you're working at a hospital, right? As a lab technician. How did that help or did not help? Maybe we can find something there as to what we are lacking as here in TAMIU that could possibly help in that area.
okay, so I guess I'll start from like the beginning with the question. So a part of the reason why I also decided to come to TAMIU or go to TAMIU was somewhat because of the population and the location of where TAMIU is. I knew for a fact, and it was very deep in my heart, that I did not want to go to a PWI. I did not. It was out of the question. So when I was applying to colleges, I would mainly look at demographics. And if it was even like 50% white, I was like, no way I'm going. And I mean, that's probably because of like the high school that I went to and, you know, the certain students that I interacted with, that I was like, I don't want to be in a place where, I don't know, I felt like outcasted. So when I was looking into TAMIU and I saw the demographic, even though it was like 90% Latino, or it was kind of interesting. I was intrigued to see what it was like. And yes, as I mentioned before, it lacked diversity, but it wasn't terrible. It wasn't terrible. I found myself at home there. But now fast forward to where I am right now, seeing how you know the Latino community interacted with each other on campus or like in Laredo, I kind of just added it into my mental catalog of experiences I can put into use here now that I have a job in a hospital and like healthcare in a way, in a sense, because it tends to be Black and brown or people of color who don't usually get treated the best in, you know, hospitals and clinics and stuff like that, just because of who they are or the color of their skin. There have been instances, I don't know if you all have heard or know of this, but people say of a darker skin tone might come in with bruises that are not visible because of the color of their skin, and there isn't training for that, because it's primarily you're trained to treat people who are of lighter skin tones or are white. So I guess putting that into practice now that I know who I am as a person and the type of people that I interacted with in TAMIU, I would definitely say it opened how I see the others that I work with. Like I don't see patients directly, but when I see patients and their information, I can kind of see the correlation between like, oh, this is a person of a certain background. I hope they're getting treated the same way as, you know, their white counterparts and whatnot. And I guess if later on I do work with patients or I work directly with people, I'll be able to practice that myself to them. So, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any last questions? Yes, go ahead.
So you came to TAMIU, which is 90% Hispanic, and you're half. How do you think that would, or your experience at TAMIU would have differed if you didn't have that Hispanic side to hang on to and embrace and feel accepted with? If you didn't have that path, like, how do you think that would have impacted your experience with it not being very diverse here?
Okay,
They need to celebrate the Hispanic side, you know, the Mexican side, the Hispanic side, the Latin culture. So like them celebrating that, but not the Blackness very much. So, you know, that we've seen, like, how do you think it would have impacted your experience had we not had that happen?
Okay, I think that cleared it up. Just because I know some of the students there that, you know, aren't like Latino at all, they're just, you know, Black American, or they maybe might be Afro-Latino. I've spoken to them about experiences like that because it just comes up in conversation, I guess. But say if they're darker than I am, or they're Black, or they don't identify with the Mexican Latino culture, they do feel othered. And I know it's not a direct thing, but because there's so much like, yay, like Latino culture, yay, like Mexican culture, they feel like, okay, but what about us? Like, we only get a month, that's it. And I see where they're coming from, but then also being as involved as I was on campus, I know that the resources are for everyone. They're not supposed to be othering, but they feel like that just because of the spaces that are filled. Like, for example, the space that I see right now, they might feel a little othered by this because they don't see people like them. So I guess to answer your question, if I didn't identify too much with like my Mexican culture, or I wasn't raised with that side of me as well, I might feel a little out of place in TAMIU.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that that's a great exit point, right, to think about, especially for those that may not have had the privilege that you did have of being exposed to the Mexican side, even though that you are mixed, that you right. So we think about our other fellow dust devils that may not have had that experience, and how they feel othered in spaces that were there. And so how are we being inclusionary to help them? So I greatly appreciate you coming from Chicago and visiting with these wonderful folks here. Yes, it's so great to see you as well. I know it's only been about 2 months since you graduated, so I know, but I greatly appreciate it. So let's give Jaden a round of applause. And thank you, Jaden, for coming in and sharing your story. It is truly a blessing to have had the opportunity to have worked with you. And it's something that I greatly appreciate you coming back and sharing your story with your fellow soon-to-be alums as they graduate from TAMIU. So thank you so very much, Jaden.
Thank y'all for having me.
All right, so for those of you who are here, and Dana, you can just stay on real quick. I think maybe want to do a little picture, I think, or something. But for those of you who are still here, there's about 7 of these left this semester. So if you RSVP'd for the event starting in 2 days, so Friday, whatever day today is, Friday, you'll be able to pick up vouchers. They are on a first come, first served basis. So you'll get $10 vouchers from the Seoul office if you RSVP to the event. But our next event will be held on March 8th, which is 2 weeks from today, and it will be celebrating Holi in TAMIU. And then so it'll be a conversation. So it's not an actual Holi celebration. We're talking about the history of it and our students and faculty and staff that do come from the Indian subcontinent and how did their experience take place here. And we'll have traditional Indian food. Couple of other events that we'll have in the month of March. We'll have a women's health panel focusing on women's health for Women's History Month, that event will be on March 24th at 2 p.m. It's a Friday, so the dates change a little bit this semester, but it will be in conjunction with the School of Nursing. And then we're also going to have a panel on Ramadan and our Muslim students, faculty and staff that are here as well in the month of March, and talking about Ramadan from a religious perspective. Because Ramadan does start in March as well. So those are just a few of the events coming up. And again, if you haven't signed in to get credit, you need to sign in. Thank you all so very much, and we'll see you all later. Let's take a picture. The picture, you all take the picture, and then I'm going to stop the recording though, okay? Yeah.